Welcome Algebra 2 students to the Unit 3 review answers. Now remember, you should have already tried all of these problems before you watch this video. You're just checking your answers with mine. You should have already tried all the problems. So let's take a look at the first problem. Now it's in standard form, so I can give A, B, and C, and then use the vertex formula to find the vertex of that equation. So as you can see, I got A is -2, B is 0, and C is 6. I plugged in negative B, or 0, all over 2 times -2, and I get for the x-coordinate is 0. To find the y-coordinate, I simply plug in 0 everywhere I see an x, and I get the y value is 6. From there, I can plug that into y equals in my calculator. -2x² plus 6, and then hit second graph to find other ordered pairs on my table. And I plotted the points -2, -2, -1, 4, 0, 6, which is my vertex, 1, 4, 2, -2. My axis of symmetry is at x equals 0, and then I can draw my smooth curve through my parabola. The second equation is also in standard form, and I found that A is 1, B is -2, and C is 1. I plugged in -b over 2a, 2 divided by 2 times 1, and I got 1 for the x-coordinate of my vertex. And then if you plug that in, you get 0 for the y-coordinate of the vertex. And then from there I can plug it into y equals on my calculator. I plugged in x² minus 2x plus 1. Second table will give me my table of values. I plotted a couple more points, -1, 4, 0, 1. My vertex was at 1, 0. I have 2, 1, and then if you scroll down, we can plot 3, 4, and then draw your smooth curve. The last equation is in vertex form, which is a x minus h quantity squared plus k. And we can see easily that the vertex is at 1, 3. The axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. It always goes through your vertex. And then we can find a couple more ordered pairs on that line and draw our parabola. So I plotted my vertex at 1, 3. I have ordered pairs at 0, 4, -1, 7. And then the reflections of those points at 2, 4, and 3, 7. And then draw your parabola. Moving on to section 5.2, solving quadratic equations by factoring. So it says, remember to factor first, and whenever we factor, we need to find two numbers that multiply to give us x². And the second number in each factor should multiply to give us +8 and add to give us -6. And those two numbers are -4 and -2. Now, the zero product property tells us that if two factors are multiplied together to give us 0, then one or both of them must equal 0. So I set x minus 4 equals 0 and solve for x, and x minus 2 equals 0 and solve for x. When I solve, I get x equals 4 and x equals 2. And remember, you can always check your solutions by plugging them into the original and seeing if you get 0. This time, we have a coefficient on the x², so we can't use x and x. We need to use 2x times 2x. And now we need two numbers that multiply to give us a +4, and then whenever we FOIL it back out, we should get a -8x. I found that -2 and -2 works. If you check your FOIL step, it FOILs back out to 4x² minus 4x minus 4x plus 4, and then if you combine your like terms, you get -8x. You only need to set one of those factors equal to 0 because they're both the same. So I solved for x, and I got x is equal to 1. For the last equation, remember we can't use the zero product property unless one side is equal to 0. So the first thing I did was I subtracted 56 from both sides. Now we need to find find two numbers that multiply to give us negative 56 and add to give us negative 1. And those two numbers are negative 8 and positive 7. Whenever you set both of those factors equal to 0, you get x equals positive 8 and x equals negative 7 as your zeros. And remember, those are the two places where your quadratic equation, your parabola, crosses the x-axis. Moving right along to section 5.3, solving quadratic equations by finding square roots. So notice I was trying to get the x squared by itself, so I divided both sides by 10 and got x squared is equal to 50. Then I could take the square root of the left and the square root of the right, and I got x is equal to plus or minus 5 times the square root of 2. If you hate radicals, go ahead and give me an approximate answer. Plus or minus 7.07 is perfectly fine as well. Second one, the first thing we need to do is get the x plus 1 quantity squared by itself, and I'm going to do that by subtracting 7 from both sides. And now we need to get rid of the 1/3 by dividing. And remember, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply on the left and on the right by 1/3, and then I can take the square root of both sides. So I multiply on both sides by 3, take the square root. The square root and the squared cancel out, leaving me with x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 3. My last step is to subtract 1 from both sides. So my two answers are positive 3 minus 1 is 2, and negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. And then I'll solve the last equation. So for the last equation, I divided both sides by 4, and I got x plus 1 quantity squared is equal to negative 25. I took the square root of both sides. The square root of negative 25 is plus or minus 5i. Remember, the square root of a negative is always going to be imaginary. Then my last step was I subtracted 1 from both sides. And I wrote my final answer with the real part first and the imaginary part second. Negative 1 plus or minus 5i. For the first problem, I simply subtracted 1 minus 6 and got negative 5. And then I did 8i minus 5i and got 3i. I wrote my answer in standard form with the real part first and the imaginary part second. For the second one, remember, whenever I need to write my answer in standard form, I multiply the top and the bottom by the conjugate of the denominator, which is 7 plus i. On the top, I'll need to distribute, and on the bottom, I'll need to do all 4 steps of FOIL. When I distributed on the top, I got 21 plus 3i. On the bottom, when I FOILed, I got 49 plus 7i minus 7i minus I squared. You have to remember that I squared turns into negative 1. So on the bottom, I really have 49 minus negative 1, or 49 plus 1, which is 50. Where did the 7i minus 7i go? Well, it turned into 0. When I FOILed, I did first, outer, inner, last. 32 minus 16i plus 28i minus 14i squared. Don't forget that the I squared is going to turn into negative 1, so this term here is really a positive 14, which I can combine with the 32, and I get 46. And then combine your I terms, and you get 12i. Make sure you write your final answer in standard form, and make sure you're not trying to combine the 46 and the 12i because they are not like terms. This is going to be the end of the first video. Look for part 2 for the rest of the questions.